So, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining our meeting. Uh, so, uh, we'll start our meeting. Today, we're going to do about bird photography. It's kind of interesting field, so I guess you'll all be interested about it. Mm. So, first, let's see what is bird photography. Bird photography is a field of photography where you take amazing pictures of birds, and it's for earn money or as a hobby or to help in studying them. It's not compulsory to do this, and for this you need to learn a bit about photography as well as ornithology. Uh, what is required to learn for bird photography? Bird photography is not an easy field to learn and to work on. So first we need to learn the basics of cameras, and then also you need to learn about the birds who are going to shoot, and also you need some other skills like these: patience, endurance, controlling your emotion. What types of cameras are good for bird photography? There are many types of cameras used day-to-day life for different fields of photography today. But for the best types of camera for bird photography is DSLR cameras. It means digital single lens reflex cameras. These cameras can also be divided again as cropped sensor cameras and full frame sensor cameras. Both are fine for bird photography, but as you are starters, I'm recommending you cropped sensor cameras because they're not that much expensive as full frame sensor cameras. And there are many brands like Fujitsu, Nikon, and most popular of them are Canon and Nikon. But that does not mean you just need one of these cameras. You can buy from one of other camera types. So what cameras are good for bird photography? Best crop sensor cameras for bird photography at the moment is Canon EOS 90 and the Nikon D850. These two are at the moment best crop sensor cameras. As your starters, that's why I'm recommending crop sensor cameras. But that doesn't mean you cannot do bird photography on normal cameras. You can do it by point and shoot cameras and mobile phone cameras, but the thing is that the image quality won't be that much good, so you wouldn't be able to do it in a professional level. So what should we learn about the camera and the lens? So it's crucial to know these factors that I have mentioned over here: exposure triangle, exposure modes, driver mode, image type, focal length, focus area, and focus modes. For today, I'll just explain about the exposure triangle. And what should you know about the bird you're shooting? It's also very important to know about the bird you're shooting. If you consider forest bird like the one over here, this one is called the Asiated laughing thrush. It's a very hard bird photograph. And so forest birds like these are very hard to photograph from normal cameras. You need the cameras with high shutter speed and also good exposure triangle control. But if you take the wading birds and water birds, mostly, they're not that much hard to photograph as forest bird, but still you need some skills to take a great photograph of one of these. This is a painted stork. And what other skills you should know? Other skills mean that skills that doesn't relate neither to ornithology nor the photography, means like patience, endurance, and controlling your emotions. These are needed because you have to face many hardships, because sometimes you have to stay in one place for a bird to arrive for hours. So you should have these kind of skills if you are doing bird photography. So let's learn about the exposure triangle, and let us learn to control the exposure factors. So what's the exposure triangle? Exposure triangle is the components of a camera that controls the exposure, means the amount of light that is entered through the lens and falling onto the sensor. These components are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO control. So this is how the exposure triangle works. Aperture controls the light by increasing and decreasing the f-stop value, which is the size of the aperture, and shutter controls the amount of light by increasing and decreasing the shutter speed, and the ISO factor does it by controlling the sensitivity of the sensor. So aperture. So what is this aperture? Aperture is one of the factors that control the amount of light that is entering the camera. What it does is close these aperture blade, close the pupil of the aperture by using those aperture blades. It can be done manually or done automatically by motors like these. What it does is, and it's very similar to the method that our irises use to control the amount of light that is sent to the retina of our eyes. And aperture also helps to take clear images and focus photos. The size of the aperture is measured in a value called f-stop value. So how do you measure the size of apertures and how do they work? As I told you earlier, aperture size is measured in f-stop value, and this measurement is gained by dividing the focal length by the diameter of the aperture. And small value represent larger apertures, and higher values indicate smaller apertures. As you can see here, f1.4 is a very large aperture. It lets almost every light over here, while f8.0 is very small. Only a small amount of light is let in. This small hole is called the pupil of the aperture, and it is controlled, as I mentioned earlier, by the aperture blades around it. In the past, this was done by hand, but in modern digital cameras, it's done by electronics, mostly from small motors. So what is the purpose of the aperture? Larger aperture, and it's very easy to see. The larger apertures lets more light into the camera, while smaller apertures only let small amount of light. Large aperture also helps to focus the selected object around and blur the background, while smaller apertures only doesn't focus like that. It focuses about all the objects around it. That's why large apertures are recommended for bird photography, because we don't need to focus other things like trees and branches around it. We just need to focus the bird. So that's why we recommend larger apertures when you're doing bird photography. So these are two pictures taken of a flower using an aperture of f5.6 and f36. As you can see in the photo taken using the higher f-stop value, lower f-stop value has more light, more exposure in it, and the background is also very blurred, so the object is focused, while in the other photo that is used taken using f36, the background is also focused a little bit, it's not blurred, so it doesn't look that much appealing to our eyes. So let's learn about the shutter. Shutter is also a factor that controls the amount of light let into the camera. What it does is increase and decreasing the shutter speed, which the shutter speed means the amount of time taken to the shutter to close and reopen. This is also a crucial factor which you need to know when it comes to photographing birds, especially forest birds. This is a picture of a shutter. As you can see, it closes and opens up. So how does the shutter work? Shutter is a door-like structure that lies just in front of the sensor. It shortly opens and then closes again when you take a photograph. This time taken to the shutter to open and close again is now known as the shutter speed. It's measured in portions of seconds or in seconds. This is very crucial when you are taking photos of forest beds because you need to use a higher shutter speed. But I'm not telling that you need a slow shutter speed for taking photos of other water birds. No, you need higher shutter speed for them too, as they sometimes can be a bit of fast too. And what is the purpose of the shutter? The purpose of the shutter is to control the amount of light. Not just that, it also helps to get a clear image. As you can see, this diagram shows pictures of 3 hummingbirds taken by using different shutter speeds. As you see, the fast shutter speed takes the full photo of the hummingbird. You can see the clear images of the wing, while the medium shutter speed will make it look like much blurry. And slow shutter speed is even worse. And so because of that, we recommend that if you're doing bird photography, it's better to use higher shutter speed range within 1/25 of 1 second or 3,000ths of 1 second. Too high shutter speed will make the photo very dark, and too low shutter speed will make you the photo overexposed, and most probably you'll not be able to see the bird that you were taking. You never use slow shutter speeds when you're photographing birds. You only use slow shutter speed to take artistic photos like the one over here. But that does not relate to bird photography, so let's continue on. So ISO factor. ISO means International Standards Organizations. And yes, as you know it, what is the ISO factor of the camera? It is the standard sensitivity level of the sensor. So what it does is control the sensitivity of the sensor. ISO is measured by ISO numbering, ranging from ISO 100 to 28,000 and much more. And if you have trouble controlling the correct exposure by the 2 other factors, the aperture and the shutter camera, you can use this feature. So what is the purpose of the ISO factor and how does it work? You have to keep ISO as low as possible to prevent the image from being noisy or you say grainy. But when you're photographing a bird in a dark place, somewhere like in a forest with thick canopies, most likely you have to keep the shutter speed high because birds are fast moving creatures, but the image will be still dark when you're still using a larger aperture. Then you can use ISO to achieve the correct exposure, but don't use it on normal lighting. It will make because ISO most times reduce the quality of the image. What it does is when you adjust it into a higher number, what it does is increasing the light sensitivity of the sensor. So what are the disadvantages of high ISO numbers? The most common disadvantage of high ISO number is making the image noisy. Means it's kind of grainy. You can see grains, and it also decreases the image's clarity and image quality. So that is why it's better to control light using the other 2 factors like the aperture and the shutter while keeping the ISO low as possible, because it won't give you a good image. Only use ISO factor when you're in a situation that other 2 factors won't control the amount of light, and so then you use ISO factor to take a well-exposed photo. So as you can see, these are 2 photos taken using different ISO levels. Sorry, I didn't put the ISO numbers in here, so I'll explain it to you. This picture was taken under ISO 400, while this picture is taken under ISO 6000. As you can see, in lower ISO photo, it's not raining, it's much clearer, but it's darker. While if you take the picture with the higher ISO number, is brighter. But if you look at it closely, you clearly see it's grainy. So that's why we say don't use higher ISO unless you have no choice but to use them, because the other two factors won't control the light. So that's it for today, everyone. We'll teach you about the rest of the bird photography part next week, because it's a very large field. Not next week, in the future. And we also have a notice for you. If you know some friends of you or people who are interested in birds and not birds and other animals, please just invite them to our group, so we can do meetings with more people. So if you have questions about bird photography, you can ask them, or you can put it into the chat box. Yes, if you have questions, yes, you can put them into the chat box. Someone has asked, how do you identify an overexposed and an underexposed picture? Wait, I'll show you a picture. I'll stop the sharing for a bit. Mm. So this picture, you can see this is a picture of a flower bud, and this is an underexposed picture. As you can see, it's dark. The surroundings are dark, and you cannot see the colors properly too. It's if you can do this by editing the pictures in a photo editor if you need. So, but it's better to take controlled exposure photo at the beginning, so it will be easier for you. And so I'll show you an overexposed photo. Now this is a photo of a sloth bear, and this is an overexposed photo. See, the whole surrounding is white, and the image is a bit of an unclear too. So you can't even see the animal's face. So this is an overexposed photo. You can also control this by using photo editors, but as I told earlier, it's better to better to control the exposure at first rather than later in an image editor, because it will decrease the image quality. And if you have other questions, or up to what level you can increase ISO in a modern camera without photo getting grain? And according to my knowledge, it's about 56,000 ISO. I'm not sure about that, but most of cameras today have ISOs up to 28,000. Yes. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. More questions? You can ask them. It doesn't matter. You can ask questions through the chat box. You can put them in the chat box. I can watch them and explain it to you. So it looks like that there are no more questions for you. So then I'll end the meeting for today. And remember the notice as if you know some people that are interested in the field, because most people in the group at the moment doesn't seem to like this field. So if you know people who like ornithology and bird photography, please invite them for our groups to share our knowledge with them. Uh, Thank you, by the way, everyone. So thank you for joining the meeting, and goodbye, everyone.